Good afternoon, Kevin Martin here, your UT admissions guy, filming today from my apartment in Queenstown, New Zealand, where I've been living for the past few months due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I also haven't gotten a haircut in like almost 5 months, so I just decided to keep letting it grow out, and I'm almost at an afro, so we'll see how long this continues for. But this video is about a recent announcement where UT Austin and Texas A&M have gone test optional for fall 2021. So they officially released that announcement, I think the third week in June. In addition to this video about going test optional, I'll be releasing 3 more about building an optimal college list, about a conversation about student debt, and also a video about coronavirus and your college admissions essays. And I've also released blog posts of kind of a lot of the similar content for these videos as well. So if you want additional content, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. So yeah, in addition to UT and A&M going test optional, almost every major private university in the state of Texas had already gone test optional in April and May. Since private universities are not constrained by this top 10 or 6% law guaranteeing automatic admission, the private universities have always had more flexibility in how they review their applicants. And so like Rice, SMU, TCU, Baylor, Trinity, like pretty much every private school has already gone test optional. With A&M and UT, in addition to Texas Tech having already gone test optional, I assume most, if not all, Texas public universities will follow suit. I'm still waiting for the UT Dallas announcement, but I would expect them to go test optional soon. Additionally, over 2/3 of U.S. News top 100 schools have already gone test optional, including every Ivy League campus. I think Princeton was the last one to announce. This test optional movement has been going on now for almost 3 decades. I think there's even starting back in the 80s, there were universities and organizations that were questioning the efficacy of the SAT and ACT because it seems to correlate most strongly with one's socioeconomic status and the resources that a student has at their high school and in their community. And with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's just accelerated this trend that had already been going on. There's a number of universities that have been test optional for quite a while, so we also have a lot of data about how universities' enrollment, admissions, retention rates, 4-year graduation, 6-year graduation rates have been affected by these test optional cohorts. So there's a lot of good information on my blog if you want to dive a little bit deeper into the details about how these are affecting universities' admissions policies and how they're engaging with the public. I also want to clarify that Texas public universities do not consider, nor have they ever accepted SAT subject tests for regular admissions. This also includes AP and IB scores. However, for honors programs at UT Austin, you do have the option to self-report those scores. I imagine that option will remain. However, we haven't seen the honors application yet to see if that's for sure the case. Another question you need to be asking yourself while you're doing your college search is whether each university's test optional policy, in addition for admissions, also applies for honors programs and scholarships. UT has confirmed that for admissions, honors, and scholarships that it's all test optional for fall 2021, but they have stated the intention publicly that they intend to restore that test requirement from fall 2022 and onward. So that's an open question that we'll have to continue looking at. A question a lot of applicants and families have already been asking me is how the test optional system is going to affect the academic index algorithm. So sort of half of the admissions criteria is a student's academics. The other half is this personal achievement index review score, where a human reader or 2 human readers are going to read and review your essays, resume, and so on to see how much of a fit you are for UT Austin and your specific major. In the past, they've done these mechanical calculations where they take your rank and your best testing date from a single testing period, and kind of have this kind of score that projects how you might do on UT's campus. These academic index formulas have always been a bit of a secret. They haven't been publicly released since 2014, and I have absolutely no idea how and whether and if not submitting a test score is going to affect this academic index calculation. Like UT hasn't released anything publicly. They did put a kind of a frequently asked question on their website, but kind of predictably, they've only released information that's kind of minimally required by state law by simply saying we're going to continue reviewing applicants holistically, but they don't give any specifics about how the mechanics of that process are going to happen. I also want to clarify some terms. So there's kind of 2 main ways that universities are reconsidering their admissions policies. One is this test optional system, which UT Austin, A&M, and most other universities are using, where you're not going to be penalized if you don't submit a score, nor is there any expectation that you submit one, and you don't have to explain yourself if you are opting out of submitting a score. But there's a smaller cohort of universities called test blind campuses, and they're unique because they do not accept any exams, whether they're submitted or self-reported, and there's many fewer test blind universities than there are test optional. One good resource for this test optional, test blind policy is the website and advocacy network called Fair Test, and they have kind of a comprehensive list up to date of all of the test optional universities, and also a subset that are also test blind. So there's some families who are also asking me, like, why are universities going test optional? Understanding that with the COVID-19 pandemic, especially for rising seniors, there's many students that don't have the opportunity to sit for the exam at all. But again, this movement predates the pandemic. And so test optional policies are intended to increase educational access and higher education opportunities, broadly speaking, for low-income students, those from rural communities, students who come from first-generation families where neither parent has received a college degree. So single-parent households, those students also have a harder time having access and scoring well on these standardized exams. Low socioeconomic students, I've mentioned already, but also those students tend to be attending resource-poor high schools that simply don't have as many options or opportunities, with their kind of more affluent suburban or private high school peers. Students often sometimes have, live with substantial special circumstances or hardships where standardized exams may not reflect their academic abilities or potential. And so one argument for test optional proponents is that the grades and coursework and transcript reflect a student's potential better than these standardized exams that kind of on its face seem to kind of predict potential success in a college environment, but it's just a lot more complicated than a simple 30 or 28 or 1450 can suggest. I also anticipate, and I already have a few clients like this, where test optional will play a role for those kind of straight A students that may attend a small private school or an early college high school or a rural environment that might have less access to AP exams, for example, or it's simply that kind of the top quarter of their class are all bunched at the very top, so that class rank is just harder to distinguish how you're doing academically. And so for those kind of high achieving students that are attending smaller schools, especially those where your grades are much higher than your SAT or ACT scores, those students might benefit. Again, I'm already working with a few of those applicants, and so this test optional movement is potentially opening up some of those campuses that may not have been target schools before. And at least for UT Austin, if you're outside of the top 6%, I suggest submitting your SAT or ACT if it's higher than, say, a 1350 or a 28. And especially if you're in the top 6%, and again, UT hasn't released how they're going to make decisions based on McCombs or engineering or computer science, but if you're in the top 6%, I strongly submitting a test score if it's relatively high for some of those highly impacted majors like architecture, nursing, computer science, business, and so on. And especially those scores need to be a little bit higher. I think the engineering average is probably something like a 1400 or 1450. Definitely for computer science, you want to be aiming for that 1450 or higher. Business also kind of a 1400, 30, 31. Especially that math subscore could help you as well. So there was a really interesting report that I read from NACAC. NACAC is kind of the governing body nationwide for higher education professionals. So this goes for kind of academic advisors, for admissions professionals, high school counselors, and so on. And they evaluated, I think, almost 1 million students who were applying to a few hundred universities, and they looked at the admissions rates for those students, and they started to look at some of the retention rates later on. And they had kind of a few clear findings. Firstly, that they did see a rise in applications for universities that went test optional. So we can expect that UT Austin, A&M, especially those becoming more popular options for Texas residents looking to stay closer to home during these economically uncertain times, and also uncertainty given the pandemic. So they saw an increase in the number of applications, and so some students are asking me, do you think it's going to be less competitive, now that things are test optional? And I think it might be the other way around. This report also found that students that went test optional were also admitted on a slightly lower basis than those who submitted exam scores. So it's hard to establish the correlation there and what actually caused the lower admissions rates. But again, we can expect some changes to happen, and I don't think test optional admissions though should change how you approach your essays and your resume. However, if you do want to provide context to your transcript to discuss, especially if you're applying for STEM programs, some of your experiences in calculus or physics or computer science or some of those engineering electives that are common, recommendation letters might also be more kind of playing a larger role, because if you're a student that doesn't have that other variable of the test scores, you might need a recommender or a reference that can speak to your abilities in the classroom. Another finding from that NACAC report found that around 75% of applicants who applied to test optional universities still chose to submit their test scores. I have also seen numbers as high as 90% for applicants at sort of those kind of top 20 or most selective tiers of universities. So UT Austin is definitely going to be as competitive as ever. If you're outside of the top quarter of your senior class, your admissions chances still remain highly improbable. 96% of all admitted students to UT Austin come from the top quarter of their high school class, and 99% come from the top half. So there's only about 700 or 800 students every year that are admitted to UT Austin who are outside of the top quarter. So if you have a test score, again, that's higher than, say, a 28 or 1350, definitely submit it. I've already seen, for example, that July ACT date, some testing centers have already canceled the exam. So if you're wondering, like, oh, do I need to retake it to improve? If you've already got like kind of that upper tier test score, I wouldn't worry about or stress out about taking the SAT or ACT. I also wouldn't stress out at all about taking the subject tests if you haven't taken them already. Again, I think especially if you're a rising senior, your energy and time might be better spent focusing on those essays and putting forward your best application possible. I would also, and especially in my next video, I talk about building a reasonable college list, and so I will touch a little bit about how test optional might affect your college list and what universities you might be applicable for. But nevertheless, to conclude that, for these universities or programs that are admitting less than 15% of their applicants, even with this test optional system, it's still going to remain extraordinarily competitive. I'm estimating that for, 80% of applicants, test optional is probably not going to affect them at all, unless you come from one of these kind of low economic, marginalized populations, or you kind of have a learning difference that's going to impact your performance on the SAT or ACT, or you're one of those students with really good grades, but sort of kind of test scores that don't reflect your academic performance. But I think for most applicants, test optional is not really going to affect their admissions chances much, other than maybe seeing a slight increase in the number of applications that UT Austin and other selective universities are going to experience. So like I say, this is the first of 4 videos I intend to release throughout July and early August. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel for the latest content. I also encourage you to check out my blog, where I dive a little bit deeper into some of these topics. I also am still taking on clients for fall 2021 freshmen, so please complete my questionnaire for a free online consultation. I've also just got all of my transfer admissions decisions results back for fall and spring 2020, and I'm like super happy to report that 95% of my transfer clients gained admission. There's only one who didn't. That was still like a 3.92 GPA for computer engineering. It's just a super hard program to transfer into. So I'll be taking on spring transfers through probably mid to late August, and then I'll start taking on the fall transfers starting over winter break following that fall semester. So please complete that questionnaire for a free consultation. And as always, I'm most easily reached by email at kevin@texasadmissions.com. So please reach out directly if you have any questions or concerns. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks, and have a great day.